The Ferrari Enzo represents one of the best automotive investments of the last 25 years. But was it really a good investment? Welcome to Petrol Lounge, presenting the 2003 Ferrari Enzo. Now, I have to tell you, I've been really excited about doing this car for a while. It is absolutely one of my favorite cars in this garage. It's one of my favorite cars that we've ever stored. I guess really the real place to start is to talk about the look, because it is a very polarizing look. When this car came out, be honest with you, I didn't like it. I thought it was ugly. There are some other people that have the same opinions of this. I have learned to really appreciate this design over time. And today, when I look at it, I think it's one of the most bold and beautiful things Ferrari has ever done, period. And I mean, we can talk about a lot of famous Ferraris, the F50, the F40. You start getting back to the 250 GTOs, all those kind of crazy things. And I just keep coming back to this because it, in a lot of ways, is so unlike Ferrari. And again, the boldness of it really strikes me. And the problem with boldness is some people are going to love this, like me, and other people are going to have a, let's just say, different reaction to this car. And really what you have to understand when you're looking at this car is a lot of the proportions, a lot of the styling comes from the F1 car of this era. So we're talking, this car is 2003, so when it's being designed and developed, we're talking about the 2000 era Michael Schumacher Ferrari F1 car. And when you look at that car and you look at this car, you see a lot of similarities. And it's everything from this front end, this nose it is shaped the way it is because it's trying to evoke that wing on the F1 car here. And you can see the nose of the F1 car. And then even these little holes here where they've put fans, this is the wing of the F1 car. This is the wheel, this is the nose. And you have this negative space here representing that hole in between the wheel and the front wing. And it continues when you step back from the car and you look at it from the side. You'll see that the front end is extremely long and the rear end is extremely short. There's very little back here that, once you get to the rear tire, you've got this much and you've got this huge nose. And I can't think of any other car that's quite proportioned this way. But if you look at the F1 car of the era, it ends at the rear wheel. And it does have a very long nose. This is supposed to, in some ways, look like the F1 car. And as you're looking at the side, again, you see these things here. And it's hard to capture this on camera. It's hard to really see it unless you're here with the car. This is a very flat piece of the bodywork right here. And that is also really uncommon on not just any Ferrari, but just any real street car. You don't see a lot of flat sides, but you do see this on the F1 car because the F1 car is built to a box. It can only be so wide. So there are parts of the car that extend out and hit the side of that box and become a straight line, become just this slab side. And you see that here, and you even see hints of the carbon fiber under tray on the F1 car here with this vent. And I can point these things out to you on the actual Michael Schumacher F1 car. But yes, this is meant to evoke those kind of feelings. Now, some people will say that they missed on this, that they didn't quite hit the mark because not everyone recognizes these things. I tend to disagree. I think they really did hit the mark. It's just that it's a really subtle nod. And unless you know what you're looking at, unless you've been around these cars, you're not going to notice it. It's not going to be evident. And that just kind of starts the exoticness of this car and really what makes it important. Everything about this, the more you dig into it, the more you look at it, everything on this car is carbon fiber, number one. And then you start looking and you see a lot of genesis of other things that you see every day in Ferrari. Like if you look at the steering wheel, it is very much like the actual F1 steering wheel, or at least a facsimile of it. You have all the buttons and placements on the wheel. You have a digital rev counter on the steering wheel. And this is all stuff that they're kind of pioneering on this car before they introduce it into other vehicles in the line. As much as it is a Ferrari, it's Michael Schumacher's car. He really did work extensively with Ferrari, saying, hey, this is how my race car drives. This is how it feels to be in the race car. This is what you should put in this car. And again, you know, this is where you start seeing the F1 transmissions. And I'll be honest, this is the first of the F1 transmissions, and it is the single clutch. And it's not as delicate or as easy as the modern F1 transmissions that we have today. I don't think it's as big a negative as most people claim, just because I feel like this car is a product of the time. This is the transmission that came with it at that time. And really, the transmission, once you're in this car and you're driving it hard and you're really banging the gears out at the top of the rev limiter, the harshness goes away. It shifts really well, really affirmatively, and you really don't notice it. It just feels like a good manual shift. And quite frankly, that's how Ferrari expected you to drive this car. They saw this as a racing machine as much as they saw it as a road car. So, you know, is it worth, you know, hanging the car up on this F1 transmission? No, it was state of the art at the time. It was the best that they knew how to build. And it's still really good, especially if you use it in the way Ferrari intended you to use it. It's brilliant. And you know what? Since we're talking about the transmission, let's just go ahead and let's open this rear clamshell and let's talk about this engine that they put in back here. When you go to open the rear clamshell of this Ferrari, a lot of people look around, they're like, oh gosh, how do you open this? Where are the things? You expect them to actually be in the cockpit of the car, the levers to open this hatch or whatever. And they kind of are, but they kind of aren't. When you're looking at this door, this is one of the first ones that I recognize as this kind of full cutaway door, where actually the bottom of the door here is part of what lifts up. You don't see that in the Murcielago, you don't see it in the Aventador, but you start to see it here, and then you see it in McLaren's, you see it in the new Ford GT. It really is a great design. It cuts out this huge door sill that you have to really kind of step over, and you know, it makes ingress and egress into this car just that much easier. And you know, I'm sorry, I'm digressing from, you know, we're going to open the hatch and I'm talking about the door, but I just get so excited about this car that I see things about it and I'm like, oh my God, I've got to tell you this, you know, oh, it's amazing. Anyway, the levers for this thing are down here inside the door. So they're actually in the door sill, and you can easily overlook them if you're not careful. Go searching in the cockpit for, you know, half an hour. This one here that's unlabeled actually controls the fuel filler door, and it is really light. You can hear it. It is made of carbon fiber just like everything else, but it does close with a nice click. And then this here, this is the one that opens up the rear hatch, and this is its own real production back here. So this is not as heavy as the F40 rear hatch. It's not as unbelievably difficult to get open, but it does operate much the same way in that you've got a panel that's really big, and there's not really a good way to open it other than to just be very, very careful. It is all carbon fiber and plexiglass, so that makes it really nice and light, but it is the whole rear of the car that opens. Something interesting about this is if you've been running the car really hard and really fast and you want to open this, the tolerances when the carbon fiber and everything else expand make it actually impossible to open when it's hot. So you have to let the car cool down, then you can open up the rear hatch. Inside you'll find this broomstick, much like the F40's broomstick that they have. This one happens to be one piece, which makes it really nice. It sits right here in a special spot. And then it's a little fiddly, but it will lock into place just like that. And then you have the whole glory of this massive V12 unit in the back of the car. And something interesting about this is it's making about 650 horsepower here and about 460 foot-pounds of torque. It's pretty stout, makes the car really fast, especially since this car only weighs about 2,800 pounds. But Ferrari kept using this engine in everything after this car. Literally everything that Ferrari has made with a V12 after this car has this same engine in it, or at least a derivative of it. You know, they change a few things, get a little bit more horsepower out of it, but effectively it's the same block, it's the same parts. And that's everything from, you know, the F12 or the 812 Superfast, or even the Ferrari FF and the GT4C Lusso. These all have the same engine. And what it also means is, while this car is very fast, and it was exceedingly fast for its day, it was truly exotic fast, there are a lot of Ferraris today that are faster than this car. And you start to wonder, well, you know, if I can go buy a 488 today for, you know, $250,000, and I can drive faster than the Enzo, why would I ever spend $3 or $4 million on a car like this? What would be the purpose? And I have to come back and say, you know, it's not about how fast the car is. It's really about the driving experience of a car like this, and just the pure art that goes into a car like this, and the things that truly make this car special. I mean, just even looking back here in this engine bay, you know, the exhaust pipes, the exhaust headers coming off of here, they're their own work of art. You have this inboard suspension here with the remote reservoirs. Again, you're not going to see this in the 488 or the 458 or any of the other Ferraris that are currently in the catalog. This is truly, I'm going to just say, it's artisan stuff. You really have to want to build this kind of thing and take on the compromises that come with it, because, I mean, we're not going to have any trunk space in this car. This isn't a truly usable car as far as a car goes, but it is a truly special experience. Since we're at the rear of the car, it's only natural to talk about the crazy aerodynamics that are going on here. Again, we're looking at the F1 car and seeing what Ferrari is doing here, just trying to evoke some of those themes. And one of the things that really you just can't escape from are these huge Venturi tunnels that are under the car. They're even big for today, but in 2003, these were monstrous. These were things you just didn't see. And they create an incredible amount of downforce for this car. On top of that, this car has active aero, and it was one of the first Ferraris to have active aerodynamics on it. You have this rear spoiler back here, and most people don't even know it exists. It's so well hidden back here, and it doesn't pop up until you hit 37 miles an hour. When you hit 37 miles an hour, it deploys fully. And you also have two active aero pieces in the front that close off some of the front radiators. And then that maximizes the downforce under the car here, which until you hit 159 miles an hour, this rear spoiler stays completely deployed. Then it starts to decrease so that it increases your top speed. And downforce on this car maxes out at 1,700 pounds, and that's at 185 miles an hour. At 185 miles an hour, this spoiler then starts to retract fully again so that you can bring this car all the way to its top speed of 218 miles an hour. And again, this is all stuff that they're pioneering in F1 and just porting over to this car. Now, active aero, of course, wasn't allowed in F1 at the time, but it was something that Ferrari was working with and experimenting with, and just kind of ported it over into this car. And, you know, it's just, like I said, it is so exotic. And in some ways you look at it today and you're like, oh, active aero, whoop-de-doo, you know, Venturi tunnels, oh, I've seen a ton of those. But you have to step back almost 20 years and say, wait a minute, this wasn't normal when this car came out. This was really fantastic new stuff. And it's even pretty dramatic today. I can't think of many cars that have Venturi tunnels like this. I really just, I don't. I'm sure there are a few in this garage here or there. But I mean, and it runs all the way down the car. It's just this huge commitment to aerodynamics. So closing this up, it's kind of just the reverse of what we did before. Because this carbon fiber lid is kind of light and delicate and everything else, there's not really a good way of shutting the hood. You don't really want to just drop it and slam it. But it's got two latches. It's got latches over here and latches over here, and they have to be secure when you close this lid. And the best way that we've found is to just kind of gently lean till you hear it click. And that should be, that's it. So ingress into this car is actually really easy. It's an easy car to get in and out of, which is surprising for an exotic. It is surprising for something that is effectively a race car. But then sitting here, and I'm really hoping the cameras can pick this up, because it's really just black on black on black on black in this interior. But it's because everything you're looking at, and I mean everything you are looking at, is carbon fiber. This is carbon fiber, and it's just bare. And it turns into the floor pan down here, and it's carbon fiber. And the dash is carbon fiber. And there's carbon fiber on the steering wheel. And this shield around the center column is carbon fiber. And the door panel is carbon fiber. And it's just carbon fiber. I think pretty much there's nothing in here you can touch that isn't carbon fiber or carbon fiber covered in leather. It is absolutely ridiculous. And I don't even know where to start. I guess because I'm looking at it, I'm going to start with the steering wheel here, which is, it's kind of unusual. So this is the first of Ferrari's F1 style steering wheels. They were trying to emulate that F1 wheel, and you have all the buttons down here. You have your turn signals up here on the wheel. Your horn buttons are kind of hidden. They're actually here. And it's different than the current models. On the current ones, you'll find the Manfrotto wheel where you can change the settings. You'll find the start button on the wheel. You don't see that on this steering wheel because they hadn't yet figured out what this was going to look like. This is effectively a prototype, and things are just not where you expect them to be. Your start button is over here. It's not on the steering wheel, it's down here. Your reverse button, which normally is in the center stack, is not to be found over here. You've got hazard lights and parking lights and the controls for the rear view mirrors. The reverse button is actually here on the steering wheel. It's just marked with an R. It's really easy to overlook, and it's one of those things, you know, a lot of people would get in this car and be like, I don't know how I'm going to get it into reverse. And you know, the rest of the buttons are, you know, you have your modes and your settings over here to control things. You have your front lift, and then you have, you know, your race button over here, which sets the car into race mode, where basically the traction control and stability control systems are pretty much turned off on this car. And that was at the request of Michael Schumacher. He actually kept telling them to loosen up all of the stability controls in this car. He wanted the car to be much more lively than a traditional Ferrari was at the time. So, you know, kind of a unique thing there. Something I find really interesting looking in this dash, there were no right-hand drive Enzos ever. They never made one. They were all sold left-hand drive like this one. But when you look at this, you can tell they thought about it. They had to have planned to make a right-hand drive car at some point, because this housing here is effectively the same over here. It looks like everything here could just be unbolted and bolted in right over here. And this is just your airbag bolted into the same identical hole that you find over here. And speaking of that, when you're looking at this dash, you're going to find It is so unbelievably raw. Again, race car. There's no extra little panels or cover-ups or anything. This airbag just kind of sits here, and there's this huge gap, a gap I can put my hand in and just reach back. It's literally just kind of bolted in there. And normally you would expect there'd be a cover panel here, just kind of trim this up, make it look a little better. No, Ferrari didn't do that. And when you look in between the wheel here, ordinarily there's some kind of trim panel here. There really isn't. It's just a hole. It's a hole that goes all the way back. I can see the hoses for the air conditioning, everything. They didn't trim this out. They just left it very raw. And that's part of what makes it really feel like a race car, because they didn't do that little extra bit to pretty it up. It's just pure raw automobile. There's no radio in here. You have a rudimentary climate control system. And I know I mentioned air conditioning, but actually there isn't air conditioning in this car. You do have a fan. You can get cool air in here. But if you drive this on a hot summer day, you're probably going to be a little bit miserable. It's not the most fun thing in the world. The seats here, they're very much like a race seat. They're carbon fiber buckets. They do have a little bit of adjustability. You can slide them forward and back. There's a little bit of a rate control. But let's just say, really wide people need not apply here. It's a very restraining seat. You have 4-point harnesses, which you really don't see in production cars and street cars. Really highly unusual. I mean, you'll see it in every race car. Actually, you'll see 5-point, 6-point harnesses. But in a street car, you're used to seeing the nice 3-point harness that you're going to pull back over around. Yeah, it's just not even here. You're going to wear the 4-point harnesses. This is how you roll up and down the window. It is a manual adjustment in your, well, then $650,000 car. Today, the equivalent of $1 million car. Yeah. Just roll up windows, no power door locks. It is really simple and Spartan in here. But it's really comfortable and cozy and a really nice place to be. Looking here, I'm looking right down at the limited production label here, which is part of the history and the mystique on the Enzo, which you'll see that it says 399 limited production. Ferrari actually made a lot more than 399. Initially, they said they were going to make 349 of these. And there was such demand. Initially, you had to be an owner of an F50 and an F40, and then they would sell you the Enzo. But with the unprecedented demand, they decided that no, they were going to make 399. And of course, for the people that bought one of the 349, there was a little bit of grumbling, but I mean, whether it's 349 or 399, it's still a really limited production car. It's not like they're going to make a whole ton of these. It's still going to be a great investment. And then Ferrari decided they were going to make a 400th car. And that's the one that they famously gave to the Vatican. They gave to the Pope. And the Pope eventually auctioned it off for charity. And it earned a considerable amount more than the normal Ferrari. So everybody said, okay, well, 399, but they really made 400, whatever. But remember, this is 2003, 2004. The internet's still relatively new, and people weren't really thinking about things like VIN registries. And the owners of these cars started getting together, and they put together a website, and they started counting. How many of these did they really make? And they, well, I've got this VIN number, and I've got this VIN number. And, famously, this badge doesn't say, number 4 of 399 or number 187 of 399. It just says 399. Which one you got, who knows? Really, there's somewhere around 450 or 460 of these cars that were actually built. And apparently this is kind of a Ferrari thing that sometimes they go over the production that they say that they're going to go over. It's happened on other cars as well. This isn't the only limited production Ferrari that they actually made more of than they were supposed to. But truth be told, it really doesn't affect the value of these cars all that much. You're still talking a very limited production run. You're still talking about cars that people don't normally part with. I mean, if you own this car, I don't know what you're going to sell this car and buy that you're going to think is better. That's more amazing. Interesting thing about this car is Ferrari has actually gone on record and said there will not be another Enzo ever that's totaled. Everything that's in this car, Ferrari can still create today. And the value of the cars has gone up so far that Ferrari could literally rebuild you the whole car from the VIN plates, and it would cost you less money than going out and buying a new one. So even if you, I don't know, drove it off a cliff and set it on fire, and the only thing you could salvage out of it was a VIN plate, Ferrari is still going to rebuild this car for you. And it's going to be exactly like it was. And, you know, the value is still going to be such that, you know, it's cheaper for you to go that route than to just buy one. And that's kind of insane. There's not many cars in this world that, number one, you can say that about, that the parts of the car actually are less than the total replacement cost of the vehicle. And number two, there's very few manufacturers that could even say they could do that. I mean, if you have a vintage Mustang, there's a few companies like Dynacorn out there that can reproduce any part for that car. You could effectively rebuild your Mustang from scratch. But, you know, Lamborghini's not going to do that for you. If you total out your Countach, if you just wipe that thing off the face of the earth, Lamborghini doesn't have those parts to rebuild your Lamborghini Countach from the ground up. If you do that to a Murcielago, maybe they still have the parts on the shelf, maybe they don't. You know, Porsche, depending on which one you have, there's a few cars that they're starting to do that with, particularly vintage 911s. They have a special workshop where they will refabricate anything that they don't currently make. But again, this is a rare thing, and it's really rare that you're going to come out ahead on that kind of restoration. We talk a lot in here about, you know, if you want to restore a car, you really need to think about, do I have an emotional attachment to this VIN number? Because you'll almost never come out ahead. It costs so much in labor and parts and everything else to rebuild a car, to restore it from whatever condition it's in. It's almost always cheaper just to buy whatever you want perfect rather than trying to rebuild from something less than. That's not the case with this car. You literally could just buy, you know, a chassis shell and have Ferrari rebuild it back for less. Absolutely bonkers insane. I don't even know what to make of that. When we talk about starting the Enzo, this key looks very familiar to anyone that's been in the 360 or 430 Ferraris of the era. It's very, very similar, but it is a little different in that it's much more simple. The 360 Ferrari has some buttons on it for like the front trunk, the power door locks, security system, stuff like that. This car doesn't have any of that. It doesn't have power door locks. It doesn't have a remote open for the trunk. So it doesn't have any buttons on the key. And another thing too is this switch here is going to be from just a normal regular Ferrari that didn't have a start button. So when you turn it, this is the start position, but I can even turn it one click further, but it doesn't actually do anything. Ordinarily that would start the car, but in this one you have to actually put on the brake and then hit the big red start button here. As we've gotten so excited talking about everything else, I kind of forgot about the actual usability of this car. So, you know, I mean, there is a trunk here. And as I was going to get in the trunk, I noticed a few other things about this car. Like, you know, we were talking about the geometry just of this door as it opens up, and there's some really tight clearances and a lot of math involved where this door opens up and it just barely clears this front fender here, and there's a special hinge and everything else. It's just really kind of crazy what they have done here with, you know, with this door. And while we're here, while we're looking at things, there is this Scuderia shield on the car. Some people have questions about this. They ask about it. On the original Ferrari race cars, this was hand painted on the car. Today it's a badge. It's a little bit contentious with Ferrari owners sometimes, in that originally these badges were only found on Ferrari race cars. And today you can order it on anything you want. You can buy the most quote unquote pedestrian Ferrari that you want. And if you're speccing it out, you can say, hey, I want Scuderia shields on the side of my car. And Ferrari will put them there. But just know if you do that, there are some Ferrari owners that will look at that and go, well, it's not really a race car. So just side note, I feel like they belong on this car because, like I've said, this Ferrari did think of this car as a race car, not as a road-going car. And also the SF on the bottom, a lot of people have questions what that stands for. It just means it's for Scuderia Ferrari, Ferrari race team. Also, this has carbon ceramic brakes on the front, which, you know, today you find these on everything. Corvettes have them. You know, every Lamborghini, every Ferrari has this. But this is one of your first applications of this kind of technology on a car. And it kind of caught some people off guard because a brake job on this car, if you have to do rotors and pads, it can be as much as a normal automobile. You're talking about $24,000, $25,000 to do a full set of rotors and pads. And nobody had experienced that when these cars were new. And you kind of look at that and you go, well, that is what they cost. But if you bought this new, and these brakes would last a long time, but let's just say you're going in for your 10,000 mile service on this car, and the Ferrari dealership goes, oh yeah, you need to do all your brakes. And by the way, that's $24,000. You know, might come as a bit of a shock. Then again, an oil change on this car costs about $800. So maybe you've gotten used to that. I don't know, but you know, with everything Ferrari, you can be surprised at what the cost of maintenance just might be. Anyway, we were going to open this front trunk, and the latch for that is pretty much in the same place you find the latches for the rear. It just happens to be at the front of the door. And it is really easy to overlook. I overlooked it earlier, and it's just right here. It hides really well. And let's go open the trunk. So this is what the front of a Enzo looks like. You don't have a lot of room for your stuff. And quite frankly, if you want to keep all the Ferrari stuff in here, which you do because a lot of the value of the car is tied up in all these things that are in the front of the trunk, your girlfriend is going to be able to put a small purse up here. There's no room in the cockpit other than your lap. You got no room behind the seats. This is pretty much all you have. But, you know, you do have a little bit of room. Looking at this though, again, I'm struck with, you know, this is all carbon fiber. It's all exposed. It's all very beautiful. You can see the inboard shocks. They even did this on the front of the car, which again compromises your front trunk space along with other things. But if you're really building a race car, this is what you're going to want to do. And I mentioned all the value that's tied up in here, and this is your beautiful Ferrari manual for this car. It has a nice little magnetic clasp, and it even has a Ferrari flashlight in here, which these things are shockingly expensive if you don't have them, or they have disappeared, or someone has borrowed it, or your child took it to go play with or whatever. They're really hard to come by. You'd be shocked. But even more importantly, in this car, we have what's called the Red Book. So this box here actually contains the Classic A certification book for this car, and it is still wrapped, so I don't want to open this up or anything, but it is a nice red leather-bound book. It has all kinds of details about this car in that book, and the reason that this is so special is at any time you can send your Ferrari back to Ferrari for this kind of Classic A service. And what it involves is Ferrari goes through the entire car from stem to stern, inside and out, and they look at everything. And they want to make sure that everything in this car is exactly the way it was when it left the factory. And if they find anything in the car that isn't authentic, that isn't correct, that is broken, damaged, anything, if it's not perfect, it gets replaced. And because of this, your Class K certification can take many, many hours, and it can cost you many, many thousands of dollars. But if you have this book, and it's a recent Class K certification, and you have that with the car, you're talking about something that can bump the value of this car 20, 30%, just having that book alone, because somebody is going to know this is a perfect example of the car that they want to buy. And since we're talking about worth, let's go back to our original question about this car. You know, a lot of people talk about vehicles as investments, and a lot of times here at Petrol Lounge, we counsel people against thinking of a car as an investment. It is really difficult to come out ahead. It's really difficult to come out well. Even in today's market, where a lot of people have made fantastic decisions, buying wonderful cars, and have accelerated, and you know the value's gone up 2-3 times, you're still gambling. And this car represents one of the better buys that you could have done in any time between, I'd say, 2000 till now. And let's talk about that. This was a car that in 2003 was a $650,000 car. Now that's not inexpensive. It's a very expensive car. It'd represent, with inflation and everything else here in 2022, we're talking about the equivalent of $1 million. Okay. Not the most expensive thing you could have bought, for sure. Today, the car is worth, again, somewhere between $3.5 to $4 million. Now, there is one Enzo that sold for more, but it was the 400th Vatican Enzo, and that has a special value associated with it. And I want to say that it sold for about $6 million. But outside of that, let's just say that you could get $3.5 million for your car. If you had taken that $650,000, you invested it in the stock market, or wherever you chose to do your investment, and you got about a 10% annual rate of return from 2003 until today, that's 19 years, you're looking at right on about $4 million is what you would have got. And a 10% return year over year over year over year, anybody will tell you that's a pretty good investment. If you can do that every year, fantastic. So actually, this was a pretty good investment. There's a lot of ways you could have done worse. Then again, if in 2003 you had taken that $650,000 and invested it in Apple, you'd be looking at $300 million today. So in light of that, you might say, well, not as good. But really, at the end of it, you can't drive your stock portfolio. Thank you for joining us as we present the 2003 Ferrari Enzo. This has truly been a special experience for me. I hope you've really enjoyed the time that we've spent with this car. I hope you'll hit like and subscribe, because we've got all this content here. We're going to keep delivering it to you. Just stay tuned. Keep watching. It's going to be there. And once again, thanks for spending time with us here at Petrol Lounge.